Monster City Madhouse, a year-round online store full of Halloween and classic horror shirts, with an emphasis on the vintage look. Use code SAVE10 for 10% off your order. MonsterCityMadhouse.com. Free shipping and financing's available. Welcome back to Southern Ghost Stories. I am the American Haunt Historian, Alan Searcy. Glad you guys are joining us. I got a wild, fun show today. Hey, while we're at it, the big book giveaway I'm right in the middle of it. If you guys take a screenshot and leave a review of the Southern Ghost Stories podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find the show, leave us a review and take a screenshot and send it over to the Southern Ghost Stories Facebook page or Instagram. And I'll enter your name into the giveaway. So put the names in a hat, and the first week of February, I'll give the books away. So trying to, do something fun and for the new year, and also help the podcast reviews. It's no secret they help the algorithm, and we're trying to get this thing to the top of the charts. So anyway, giving away free books. Also Hex, that's one of the new books about the Voodoo Doctor in Knoxville. Below the Trestle, the Pope Lit Goat Man. Deep Cut Southern Ghost Stories, New Orleans. I mean, you pick. If you win, you get to pick your book. So I guess we'll jump right into the podcast today. I've been kind of bouncing all over the place, and I want to do something out west in Wyoming. I love the Old West and lots of fun cowboy stories and just, outlaws. So out in the high desert of Wyoming, the wind doesn't just blow. It carves. It carves the landscape. It carves the people. And sometimes it carves out stories so dark they feel like they belong in a Victorian penny dreadful rather than the American West. Today, we're going to leave behind the humidity of the South for the sage breath of Rawlins, Wyoming. I'm talking about a man who was an outlaw in life, but a piece of apparel in death. This is a story of big-nosed George Parrott, the man who became the only person in American history to attend a gubernatorial inauguration as a pair of shoes. So he was born George Parrott in France in 1834, and he was far from the romanticized gentleman outlaw. George Parrott, he was a career criminal who used at least 4 aliases that are known. Could have been more, but he went by George Warden, George Manus, George Reynolds, and my favorite, Big Beak. He had a big nose. So there was a train disaster in 1978, and he was a member of a gang led by a man named Sim Jan. And his gang, they weren't just rustling cows. They were professional road agents, quote unquote. They terrorized the trails between Deadwood, South Dakota, and Cheyenne, Wyoming. They robbed freight wagons and stagecoaches. And George is known for a volatile temper and a habit of spending his loot lavishly in Montana saloons, which, true to the truth over what you hear mantra, is exactly what eventually got him caught. He couldn't keep his mouth shut when he was drunk. And these groups, they have rustlers, and those were low-stakes thieves. They stole unbranded cattle or horses from open ranges. It was a crime of opportunity and required knowledge of livestock, but it didn't usually involve standing and delivering. And in this group, they also had highwaymen or road agents. And this was a setup in the criminal hierarchy. They borrowed from the British term for robbers who held up travelers on the King's Highway. American highwaymen targeted stagecoaches and private travelers. And they didn't just steal, they intercepted. This gang George is in, they utilized the geography, narrow canyons to ambush targets. And they wore masks, kind of like in the movies you see. They used simple bandanas tied around their face. And they relied on the shock of a sudden stand and deliver, or hands up, prevent a shootout. Someone with a mask shows up and jumps in front of you, hands in the air. You're so startled, what do? You're not going to fight back. You throw your hands in the air and you give them what they want. Well, by 1878, the easy money from stagecoaches, it was drying up. Stagecoaches, they carried less cash and were becoming better guarded. Well, the Union Pacific Railroad, that was the whale. That was the big one that these bandits were after. So trains had a specialized express car, often run by companies like Wells Fargo. They're still in business today. These cars were essentially rolling bank vaults, and they carried company payrolls. thousands of dollars in cash to pay railroad workers across the territory. Some would have gold bullion, newly minted coins or raw gold being shipped from western mines to eastern banks. So, just 1 year before George's big attempt at the big score he had, Sam Bass had robbed a Union Pacific train in Big Springs, Nebraska, and he got $60,000 in gold coins. So in today's money, 2026, $60,000 is $1.8 million today. That's a big chunk. So every outlaw in the West, including George, they were trying to get that big score like Sam Bass had in Nebraska. Well, the Union Pacific track through Wyoming, it was isolated. George chose Medicine Bow because it was a lonely stretch. To rob a train, you just didn't stop it. You had to derail it or sabotage the track. George's gang pulled at the spikes from the rails, hoping to force the train to stop or maybe even crash so they could blow the express car safe with black powder. So there was kind of like a Robin Hood sentiment among some locals. Many settlers hated the railroad monopolies, Union Pacific and Southern Pacific, for the high prices and land grabs. Outlaws who robbed the corporate giants were often protected or even cheered by the common man, until they killed lawmen, like George ultimately did. So they had this big plan to rob a steam engine, but ultimately it failed, and the aftermath was worse. 2 lawmen, Deputy Sheriff Robert Widowfield and Union Pacific Detective Tip Vincent, tracked the gang to Rattlesnake Canyon. They never stood a chance. The gang ambushed them, shot them down, and fled. For 2 years, George was a ghost, but outlaws always talk. George got drunk in Miles City, Montana, and started bragging about the murders. He was hauled back to Rawlins by train, but the people of Wyoming were interested in a long trial. In 1871, it's March 1881, a lynch mob snatched George from his cell. They marched him to a telegraph pole, and they tried to hang him twice. The first time, the rope broke. The second time, they made it stick. George Parrott was left swinging in the Wyoming wind. But in most stories, that's where the haunting begins. Well, in this story, the real horror is just getting started. Enter Dr. John Osborne. Dr. Osborne was a young, ambitious physician who saw George's corpse not as a man to be buried. His body, it was material. He took a death mask of George's face, a common practice then, but then he went further. He removed the skin from George's chest and his thighs. He didn't throw them out. He sent the skin to a tannery in Denver with very specific instructions. Make me a pair of sturdy dress shoes and leave the nipples on. Well, the tannery couldn't fulfill the nipple request, but they did deliver a pair of two-toned, high-top brogues. Dr. Osborne wore them frequently. In a twist of fate only the Old West could provide, John Osborne's eccentricity didn't hurt his career. In 1893, he was elected the first Democratic governor of Wyoming. And legend has it, and the historical record leans toward the truth of it, that he wore those human skin shoes to his inaugural ball. So imagine that, dancing across a ballroom floor in the skin of the man you helped dissect. But what about the rest of George? His skull was gifted to a female protege of Osborne's, Dr. Lillian Heath. She uses George's skull as a doorstop, and later it was a flower pot for several decades. Well, for 80 years, George's body was missing. Then, in 1950, construction workers in Rawlins hit a whiskey barrel buried in the dirt. Inside were the remains of a man with a sawed-off skull. Today, you can visit the Carbon County Museum. You can see the death mask, and you can see the skull. And sitting there behind the glass, you'll see the shoes. They look like ordinary, deep, dark leather shoes. But if you look close enough, you're looking at the ultimate price of frontier justice. I love stories about the Old West, just wild stuff in Wyoming. It's crazy. So, in the late 1860s, South Pass City was the center of a gold rush. It was a place where a man could make his fortune in a day and lose his life in an hour. But the greatest danger wasn't a cave in or a claim jumper. It was a warm meal and a soft bed at a place called the Bartlett Inn. Today, I'm going to talk about Polly Bartlett, Wyoming's first and perhaps most prolific serial killer. They call her the murderess of Slaughterhouse Gulch. It's a story of gold, arsenic, and a vigilante's bullet. But as we'll see, it's also a story where the lines between history and folklore, they get a little bit blurred by that Wyoming wind. So our story begins in Ohio. Jim Bartlett and his daughter Polly ran a rundown saloon in a rough part of Cincinnati. Polly was in her 20s, and by all accounts, she was a striking, lovely young lady. She had what they called side curls and a sharp magnetic gaze. She was the bait, and Jim was the muscle. In 1867, the lure of the West called. They packed a wagon and headed for the gold fields. They eventually settled 3 miles east of South Pass City. To the weary travelers on the trail, the Bartlett Inn looked like an oasis. Imagine you've been panning gold for months. Your back is broken, your hands are calloused, but your leather pouch is heavy with 4,000 in gold dust. And you see the light of the inn. You see Polly standing in the doorway. She offers you a buffalo steak, some high-grade whiskey, and a place to rest. You think you're the luckiest man in the territory. But the whiskey has a secret ingredient. Down in Cheyenne, the Bartletts had purchased large quantities of arsenic, and they said it was to keep the Rocky Mountain ticks away from their wagon. But Polly didn't use it for ticks. She laced her drinks. As her guests felt the hospitality of the inn, the paralysis would set in. Within minutes, they were dead. Well, Jim Bartlett, he had a job too. While Polly stripped the bodies of gold, watches, and boots, Jim was out back, just a few hundred yards away from the inn where there was a deep, jagged ravine. Today it's known as Slaughterhouse Gulch. Legends say that they just didn't bury their victims there. They discarded them like trash. Over the span of 1 year, it's estimated the Bartletts murdered 22 men. That's almost 2 people a month. In a lawless territory, people went missing all the time. It wasn't nothing new. Native American raids, outlaws, or just getting lost in a blizzard. The Bartletts had a ready-made excuse for every disappearance. But greed has a way of tripping itself up. In August 1868, a young man named Theodore Fountain checked in. Theodore wasn't a lonely drifter. He was the son of Bernard Fountain, a wealthy and influential mine owner. When Theodore didn't show up, Bernard didn't just shrug it off. He hired the Pinkertons. And the Pinkertons, that was like the elite detective agency back in the day. So the Bartletts sensed the noose was tightening. They fled toward Oregon, but the Pinkertons were on their heels. A man named Ed Ford, who had his own suspicions because his brother Sam had also vanished after staying at their inn, joined the hunt. They caught up to them at a camp along the Hoback River. A gunfight broke out. Jim Bartlett was shot dead on the spot. Polly, the amazing poisoner, was taken alive. She was brought back to South Pass City and thrown into the local jail there. But the people of South Pass City, they weren't known for their patience. On October 7th, 1868, justice didn't come from a judge. It came through a window. A German immigrant named Otto Klockhorst, a foreman for the Fountain Mines who had been very close to young Theodore, walked up to the jail cell window with a double-barrel shotgun. He didn't say a word. He just pulled the trigger. Polly Bartlett died on the floor of that cell, never facing a jury. Today, South Pass City, it's a state historic site. It's a ghost town in the literal sense, a place of arrested decay. And according to the locals and the tourists who wander the ruins, Polly never really left. Visitors report seeing a woman in a tattered 1860s style dress standing near the fountains of what was once the inn. Others have heard the sound of a woman laughing in the old jail cell where Polly was shot dead. But the most chilling reports come from the Slaughterhouse Gulch itself. Hikers say the air there is really heavy and still, unnervingly cold, even in the heat of a Wyoming summer. Now, here's where the haunt historian in me has to speak up. If you look at the official records of 1868, you won't find a death certificate for Polly Bartlett. You won't find a Pinkerton file for Theodore Fountain. Many historians believe the story of Polly Bartlett was a tall tale created in the 1860s by pulp writers to boost tourism. They argue she's a Wyoming myth, a frontier Hotel California, quote unquote. But does that make the hauntings any less real? Or does the belief in a monster create a ghost of its own? Whether she's a cold-blooded killer or a figment of a writer's imagination, the legend of Polly Bartlett, it's a reminder of what the West was, a place of desperate beauty and hidden traps. If you ever find yourself driving down the Wind River country, stop by South Pass City, stand by the old jail, look out at Slaughterhouse Gulch, and if a beautiful woman offers you a meal and a drink, I'd probably want to keep driving. So let's switch gears, go to another part of Wyoming. Deep in the Bighorn Basin, there's a place where the map tells a lie. If you look at the blue expanse of the Bighorn Reservoir today, you see a sportsman's paradise. But beneath those ripples lies a town of Kane. In the 1960s, the government decided a dam was more valuable than a community, and the people of Kane were forced to pack their lives in wagons and trucks, and they left their homes to the rising tide. But you can't move everything. You can't move the memories. And you certainly can't move the darkness that soaked into the soil decades before the first drop of water hit the rooftops. Today we're talking about a ghost ship made of headstones and the woman who haunts the waterline. It's a story of Matilda Waters, the Blue Lady of Kane. In the early 1900s, Kane, it was a hopeful place. It was a railroad town, a shipping point for cattle. It was a hub for Mormon families who had settled in the basin. Among them were the Waters family. To understand what happened in 1921, you have to understand the isolation of Wyoming. This isn't the lush, rolling hills of Tennessee. This is a landscape of extremes, bitter, bone-chilling winters, and summers that bake the earth until it cracks. And for a mother raising a large family in a remote cabin, the silence of the plains can become deafening. Matilda Waters was, by all accounts, a devoted mother. But something was breaking inside of her. In the spring of 1921, what doctors then might have called melancholy or pioneer cabin fever, it took a sharp, violent turn into what we recognize now as a severe psychological break. It happened on a Tuesday. Matilda's husband was away tending to the business of the ranch. Alone in the house with her children, the word simply went dark for Matilda. She picked up a firearm, and in a fit of inexplicable despair, she shot 4 of her own kids. The house, once filled with the chores of a Tuesday afternoon, became a slaughterhouse. Then Matilda turned the weapon on herself. When her husband returned, he didn't find a home. He found a nightmare. He walked into the kitchen to find his wife slumped on the floor, still clinging to life. As he knelt in the blood to hold her, she breathed her last breath in his arms. But the true horror, the detail that stays with you, is that he could hear the cries of his other children. Not all of them died instantly. He was a man trapped between a dead wife and dying children, miles from help, as the Wyoming sun set over the basin. Well, when the Yellowtail Dam was completed in the 60s, the town of Kane was submerged. The houses were raised or flooded, and the cemetery was relocated, or so they said. But as any historian in the West knows, relocation is often incomplete. During years of drought, the Bighorn Reservoir recedes, and when it does, the Kane Cemetery emerges from the mud like a skeletal hand reaching out of the water. And this is when the sightings begin. Locals and boaters tell stories of the Blue Lady. From a distance, they see a beautiful, shimmering figure in a long blue dress standing on the muddy banks of the cemetery. She looks graceful, almost ethereal, but as curious onlookers steer their boats closer, the image shifts. The beauty melts away to reveal a withered, horrible face. The face of a woman driven mad by grief and guilt. She isn't just wandering, she's searching. She moves between the old headstones, looking for the four names she shouldn't have been responsible for putting there. And this is a very specific kind of haunting that happens when a place is erased by man. When we bury a town under millions of gallons of water, we think we've washed away the history. But the story of Matilda Waters proves that some stains go deeper than the lake bed. So if you find yourself in the Bighorn Reservoir and the water's low, keep your eye on the shoreline. And if you see a blue light dancing near the old Kane cemetery, don't go closer. Some others are still looking for forgiveness that water will never provide. So hope you guys enjoyed this episode, going out west, and be sure to pick up a book. Hex, the book about the voodoo doctor, it's done really well. Below the Trestle, the Pope Lit Goat Monster, two of the new ones this year. Also, I mentioned earlier the Southern Ghost Stories Facebook and Instagram pages. Send me some questions. I did a Q&A back, I think it was November or December. I'm looking to do another one here pretty soon. I've been trying to answer a few questions here and there, but also be sure if you leave a review for us, take a screenshot and send it over to us, Southern Ghost Stories Facebook, Southern Ghost Stories Instagram. You can find me on Twitter, Alan Searcy. I'm also on TikTok and Facebook. So lots of cool things coming up for 2026, and I'm ready to get going, ready for the weather turning, start traveling a little bit, tell some stories. But appreciate you guys checking with me today, and I'll get back with you here in a few more days. I'll see you soon. Check out the exclusive shirts from Monster City Madhouse, Gravestone, Rocktober, and Val Halloween. All that and much more at MonsterCityMadhouse.com.